G'day, my name is Graham, and I would like to open a discussion on the idea that the people in the West are freer than the people in China. Now, I spent a year in China and I've spent 52 years in Australia, so I can do a relatively comparison between the two. And in fact, amazingly, because I spent a year teaching in China, I was far freer in China intellectually than I've ever been in Australia, and that I've ever witnessed people be in Australia, other than the exception of Paul Keating and a few others. But see, people only think they're free because they don't know any other paradigm, and Australians live within this idea that they're free because they have a democracy, but they're not as free as the Chinese are when it comes to discussing things like climate change, homosexual marriage, and many other things now, or Islam, or many other things, men and women, all sorts of what is science, all those sort of things that are basically that in Australia have a great restriction on them within society created by political correctness. So political correctness in Australia governs or limits the intellectual intercourse or the level of it that people can have in Australia. So mostly the conversation is limited to people giving opinions that are a standard opinion, the same as what they're expected to give and what people expect to hear from them. They hardly are going to express anything new. Now in China, there is a little bit like that, because they also, the thing called you can't be a leader in a class, because I suppose the Communist Party doesn't like people suddenly becoming big time leaders, because it is a communist party and it likes to control some of the way the flow of the conversation goes, and it can't have someone in society like a religious leader popping up and taking the people away from the Communist Party. Fair enough, because it is 1.3 billion people that are coming out of poverty at just a fantastic rate, and because the Chinese government are so much freer to speak about what actually matters than the Australian government, which speak about things that don't matter at all, or basically make things up, especially when it comes to climate change and the cost of electricity. You know, that we can't have dams, roads, we can't burn coal and all those sorts of things, because there's a restriction here in Australia on freedom of speech. But in China, the Chinese leaders and the Chinese people can speak freely about things like coal and how we're going to use it, and get into a scientific discussion about the coal, economics and climate change, which has allowed them to go ahead and develop their country and control the course of their economy in a way that Australians cannot do, because they've lost control of their economy. Because when the idea of climate change was politicised in Australia, there was a massive media and political dampener on the conversation, because basically they all wanted to rush it through so they could raise the cost of electricity and subsidise a lot of private companies out of public money. And then they say, oh, we don't have corruption in Australia. Well, what is that when you legislate to subsidise private companies, when you've privatised the electricity, but then you're subsidising just as well? Well, you didn't have to subsidise the electricity before in Australia, but now you're subsidising it in private. Before, electricity in Australia used to subsidise hospitals and things like that. Now, the cost of hospitals are going up because of the cost of electricity, the cost of everything up. Now, because they are free to speak in China in technical terms and practical terms and logical terms, in Australia basically that's hardly going to happen. You're given a new idea in Australia, it's basically forbidden. You're not allowed. No one can come up with new ideas here. It's not allowed. It's un-Australian. But in China, which is racing ahead with electric cars and electric bikes and fabulously modernising these amazing cities, obviously they're having conversations what are very, very much freer than what is happening in many places in the West now. So it all depends on, yes, we're free to get drunk in Australia, but the people in China are free to get drunk over there, and it's much safer walking on the streets at night time in China than it is in Australia when you're drunk. So there's a sort of a freedom you don't have here, because it's very risky to be drinking and walking on the streets in Australia, especially around Adelaide these days, and around Melbourne. It's very dangerous. But in China, it's much freer to walk around. And people have got all the same problems, sitting in traffic jams, paying their mortgages, paying their bills and all those sorts of things. They're about the same. Yes, there are some laws and there have got some restrictions what people can say if it comes to stirring up the people against the government, but then again there really are some restrictions on what the people can say here, because then it may upset the government here as well. So it's only perception that we're freer in Australia than the people are in China. But if you're born in China, live there all your life, then you're happy and content where you are. And if you live in Australia, been here all your life, you're happy and content where you are here. But the difference is China's actually racing ahead, and Australia's come to basically a standstill because of lack of freedom of speech in what really matters, and that's creative, innovative ideas what shift the society forward in a economic value situation. Where in China they're doing that, in Australia now they're basically retardant, because new ideas are basically limited to what the banal. There are new ideas allowed in Australia anymore, it seems. So when it comes to freedom of speech, well, you know, it's a toss-up. But I know for certain, after being in China for a year, a person is freer over there. You've got no political correctness over there to speak about the things that there's so much blanket coverage, political correctness, especially in universities in Australia, that they don't even have freedom of speech anymore in universities in Australia. So there you go. Freedom of speech, it all is in your mind, and all depends on how you're brought up and what you're nurtured in, what you think freedom of speech. One person thinks freedom of speech is, some other person might think that's a lot of bullshit. You're not free to speak at all, and other people who you think aren't free to speak, you may not understand how much freer they are, because you do not understand their language, and now they talk about practical, logical matters, what really are the more important things with this developing society. Thank you. And as China races ahead because of differences in types of freedom of speech, Australia regresses. Anyway, this is just a little talk on what freedom of speech is, and why some freedom of speech is good and some freedom of speech is just waste of time speaking, like this now.